We are joined now by James Allan, who has some good news for us for a change. James, DEI, that is diversity, equity and inclusion. Did I read that correctly? That Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, has been taking the Malay chainsaw to this stuff in Florida?
Well, he actually appoints actual conservatives. And so the flagship university in Florida, University of Florida, their board of regents, which is like the Senate or the council, he's appointed people who have announced that they announced it last week that every single DEI employee, as of that minute, had lost his or her job, and they were out. And you won't believe the cumulative salary for these people is $5 million a year. I was just reading that at the University of Virginia, it's closer to $90 million a year. So they just went out the door. He fired. They were all fired, and that money has been recycled for actually teaching students. These DEI people, they just push division because they see the world in terms of identity politics. They want a statistical match between this sort of reproductive organs or this sort of skin pigmentation or this amount of however long your DNA's been on the continent. And they don't allow for any other. If there are any disparities in outcome, it's always because of discrimination, and we have to go for statistical equality. It's always for good jobs, of course, Alexandra. Nobody ever says, 95% of jobs where you die on the job are held by men, so we got to get more women in those jobs so they can die. No one ever said, they never looked to get equality in garbage men. So it's completely arbitrary, and it doesn't allow for the fact that people have differing tastes and values and what kind of jobs they want to have.
Listen, James, I don't care what you do or what you pay me. I am not going to go work on an oil rig. It's not going to happen. It would ruin my makeup. It would ruin my outfits. So, yeah, women, I think, definitely pick different jobs, and that really upsets the left. But I think conservatives, particularly in Australia, we're under this impression that the DEI rot in our culture is so deeply rooted that nothing can ever be done about it. That's it. But, we've heard Malay in Argentina who just basically gutted his entire government and got rid of them all. We've got Ron DeSantis proving you can do it. I mean, surely this means that no matter how bad DEI is, it can actually be fixed if someone in power decides, yeah, we're going to get rid of it.
Well, of course you can do something, but to do something, you have to first do something. And 9 years of coalition government, the universities got worse every day. That sort of desire for group thinking and calling everyone a racist got worse every day. And what did they do? They went and consulted with the vice chancellors. So at the last voice referendum, we have 36 law schools in this country, 36 odd, I can't remember the exact number. And you could count on one machine operator's hand how many legal academics came out against the voice. Everyone else must have been for or quiet. And what do these geniuses in the coalition think the world's going to be like in 15 years? There won't be 4 of us to fight the no side. There'll be 0. And, they're going to have anybody to rely. They don't try to fix the universities. If you don't try, you're not going to fix them. They believe these idiotic rankings about Australia, some university in Australia being in the 40th best university. This is laughable. Once you see how the rankings are done, nobody believes that. Nobody believes that. And the standards have gone down, the marks have gotten easier. Everything's happened.
But the ranking, don't forget, is linked to the other universities. So as they all employ DEI, they all descend in quality. So being the top of the pile of crap doesn't mean you're a good university. But how many? How many people realize that these rankings they send out to academics? You rank other universities. So it's lefty professors ranking other universities where their lefty professors are ranking. The rankings are meaningless. They really are. Okay, I actually thought they were ranked based upon their quality of, the standards and their marks and results. And okay, well
there's a little bit of that, but it's you get judged by your peers and other universities. To some extent, they look at research output, and it's all focused on the hard sciences. It has nothing to say for the undergraduate degree. Basically worthless, laughably worthless.
Well, you and I used to joke about all these people wasting their time and money getting junk degrees, but it seems that, maybe we're the idiots, James, because there are all these lucrative positions in these universities. As you say, $5 million in Florida and goodness knows how many everywhere else. That's a lot of money on the table if you want to be an expert in lesbian grievance against the, petrol patriarchy. Maybe we picked the wrong career.
I almost went into that line of work too. I was this close, Alexander.
What, lesbian grievance? That was
only I'd known that lesbian patriarchy was a thing that you could get into. Who knows?
Well, you rightly said in your article that DeSantis' action should be a first step for Conservative politicians who care about the quality of the education system. But back in Australia, under a Liberal coalition government, you went into detail about how the universities got worse every year. And I want to add that universities are entirely inhospitable to knowledge. Free speech is a thing of myth. Hard scientists are infected with these mission statements and behavioural manipulation. We've got engineers doing, units on women's studies and Indigenous cultures. Now, I've asked Liberal ministers and never been given an answer as to why this happens. James, why don't the Liberals reform the university sector when they're in power, given that that's exactly what Labor does?
Because they're cowards. Some of them don't want to pick a fight. Their view is that we don't want to fight on cultural matters. My view is the opposite. The most important thing is the Western culture. And the most important thing to fight on is the culture. Somebody described it to me as, it's as if Poland said, I don't want to fight Nazi Germany. Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what Poland wants. The other side is fighting. And so we on the conservative side have to start fighting these fights. And when you do start fighting, you win. That is why Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, because whatever else you say about him, he fights. He doesn't roll over. And that's what they hate about him. And, you buy your politicians wholesale, not retail. And I think the most important thing about conservative politicians in the West today is their bravery. Forget their intelligence, forget everything else. Can they withstand the sort of hatred that will be thrown at them by the sort of NGO, human rights brigade, public broadcaster caste who represent, nobody? And if we saw this anywhere, we saw it in The Voice, where every elite organ of society was on one side and the vast majority of the public were on the other. And I thought Mr. Dutton, after The Voice, was in a great position to come out and start, being a blunt truth speaker, starting with the massive too many people who are coming in under immigration. But the worry is that he's surrounded by 30-year-old advisors who don't want to pick a fight with anybody. And, Poilievre basically fired those kind of advisors. I wish Mr. Dutton, if he has any advisors who were counseling yes in The Voice have to be fired. And any advisors who are young and have never had a job, like the guy that Pasuto just picked, fired. And you want people with life experience who want to change the world, not people who want to have a nice lucrative job in a limousine. So I don't know who's around Dutton. I think he's a pretty good politician. I like him, but boy, has he ever been risk averse and I don't want to say spineless, but on the invertebrate end of the evolutionary scale.
I was going to say, not all of us 30-somethings are bad, but to be fair, I did come out of the crucible of the retail industry, which was like the 7 layers of Dante's hell. So I do have some life experience surviving cataclysms. But, we always hear the noble line that getting every child in university is meant to be about the wonders of education. But we had another writer in The Spectator, Christopher Jolliffe, who pointed out that the government is making almost as much off student debt as it does from the mining industry. Now, I didn't know that. They're effectively mining our kids for cash and radicalising them at the same time. Now, Labor is never going to give up that juicy income of voter. And they certainly, they basically got a sweatshop for the red shirts going on in the university campuses. And I had a friend who was a blue ribbon Liberal, came out as a Green, and of course went and voted for, she votes for Pasuto in Victoria because the Liberal Party down there are basically Greens. But James, if that's the case and there's a lot of money to be made out of this university sector, then surely the government doesn't care if they're giving out woke junk degrees. They just want you to be indebted to them. They want that money. And if you vote Labor at the end of it, well, then all the better. That's a lucrative thing for the government.
Okay, so here's the truth. If you went back to the 1980s universities, then people today, half of them would fail their courses. That's how much watered down the marking standards are. And that's not surprising, because when you go from 10% of the population going to university to 50, that means you've got the other 40% aren't as smart. And you have to water down standards. If you talk about the masters, the graduate degrees that are all basically being taken by overseas people who are coming to our universities as a backdoor route to getting visas, a lot of them, well, basically none of them fail. Almost zero fail. Because when you're charging $50,000, so it is lucrative, but it's not a real education. And so you've got this problem where how many jobs in society require 4 years of university? Well, it's not 50% of jobs. So what you're creating is this over-credentialed society. Jobs that used to be done perfectly fine without a university degree are now, because you've sort of had an inflation in credentials, being done by people who've gone to university. And for many of them, they're not being done as well. Just listen to someone like Roger Franklin talking about journalism. You used to finish high school and you would effectively apprentice with a grumpy old editor for a few years, and your English had better be good. And they pounded into you that you had to hear both sides and, a little bit of balance. And you had a pretty, sure, you'd work for a paper that might have a left-wing view or right-wing view, but the journalists were better. Now you go to university for 4 years, take a journalism degree, you study the French deconstructionists, you study Marx, you basically spend 4 years in sort of a weaponized grievance politics milieu. And who is surprised that 90+% of journalists vote left? Who is surprised that when they do studies in the US, the profession, the group that has the least respect from the public are journalists? It's because, just look at the way the journalists in the US and the legacy media are treating Biden. They know that he's brain dead. They know that he's not up to the job. They won't criticize him because that would be to the advantage of Trump. Or when you've got this worldwide thuggery and authoritarianism, how many journalists had any skepticism at all about Mr. Fauci or about, why are we listening in Australia to a supposed expert who's the ABC doctor who hasn't practiced medicine 30 years and can't read the data any better than I can because he got just about everything wrong.
But not only that, James, it's also pushing out people from the jobs who should be there and who are good at their jobs. They just don't have a university degree. So all these kids who might have 5 years experience working in another part of that industry are pushed over because they don't have two degrees after their names, and yet they are the better candidates for the job. So not only that, we're creating this classism in Australia. It's a new classism where if you don't have letters after your name, well, suddenly you're perceived as not being as good, even though it might have absolutely nothing to do with how qualified you are for a job.
We're smart. I mean, personally, we are seeing the pendulum come back in the US. The number of parents sending their kids to university is going down in the US. Because here's the truth. If you go and do a women's studies degree or most sociology degrees or, Aboriginal studies degree, you come out and you're of less value to most employers than when you went in. It's like how East Germany used to take the raw materials and build a Trabant, and the final product was worth less than the raw materials. And so there's a lot of degrees where you're coming out with a big amount of debt. In the US, it's a huge amount of debt. And people are asking, does this make sense? So sure, if you're going to do engineering or medicine, and even these ones are starting to be, wokeified, but there's lots of degrees where, in a way, the old-fashioned arts degree used to be a great degree. At one point, if you go back into the 80s, something like half of the Fortune 500 CEOs had a philosophy degree, because philosophy told you how to think critically, and it told you were exposed to all sorts of ideas, and you had to wade through them. But now an arts degree is just left-wing indoctrination.
Well, don't worry about it.
I get students coming to me. Sorry, I just want to say this. I get students coming to me who are sort of conservative, and they know I'm conservative, and they say, there's no possible way I can say in class what my views are. I would fail the class. They are so, the idea that students don't self-censor is just patently false. And that's a shame.
It's a big shame, not only for the university, but for education in general. And then we've got this wonderful thing where chatbots are basically writing people's degrees for them, which is another topic for another day. But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. Thank you so much for joining us, James.
Thank you, Welsh Alexandra. You can get back to using consonants. Just give up on the vowels. Who wants vowels?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, thank you very much, James. And look, you can catch up with Spectator TV anytime, anywhere for free by watching us online at watch.adh.tv. And did you know that we have an app? All you have to do is visit the App Store and download the ADH TV app.